Okay, welcome to my presentation with the beautiful title Topography-based detection of ephemeral gullies suitable for protection by grassed waterways in eastern Austria. My name is Thomas Brunner. I work at the Federal Agency for Water Management and I'm also a PhD student at Boku University in Vienna. So as you can probably tell from my title, I'm going to talk about these three things a lot. I'm going to talk about ephemeral gullies. You can see one right here in this image. This is a feature of linear erosion. I'm talking about grassed waterways. This is the mitigation measure that we propose for situations like these. And I'm going to talk about topography. In our case, we used topographical indices to predict these locations of ephemeral gullies. So, to recap it, ephemeral gullies, these are features of linear erosion with a certain cross-section. They typically follow talweg situations in landscapes or catchments. They are usually not obstacles for field management, so a tractor can usually cross them, and they are even erased by tillage operations, but they tend to reform again after sufficiently large rainfall or runoff events, and they can then develop into permanent gullies. They are often oriented orthogonal to a water body. They are often not directly connected to a water body, but they become connected during runoff events. And finally, we propose to mitigate these ephemeral gullies by installing grassed waterways. Grassed waterways is basically the implementation of permanent grassland in these locations in the middle of annual crops, where the soil cover is usually a lot higher in the permanent grassland, and also the soil is a lot more stable against shear stress of the surface runoff, and there is also some retention of soil particles and all the attached nutrients and agrochemicals. I am not talking about vegetated filter strips. At least in Austria, we consider as a vegetated filter strip permanent grassland that is oriented parallel to a water body. And this measure of grassed waterways is one measure in the agri-environmental program in Austria since last year. So here you can see an ephemeral gully in action. This is about 2 to 3 meters wide here and several hundred meters long. And all along this trajectory, the topsoil was completely removed down to the flood pan. This was a very large event. This was probably around 100 years flood, and this photo was taken more towards the end of the event. And now imagine if there had been a grassed waterway installed here. This would certainly have reduced the soil loss by a large amount. You can also see that the surrounding parts of the field, they have been harvested and tilled just recently. There was some winter cereal here, so this was especially an especially bad point in time for this event to happen. So where did we perform our modeling? We were concerned with the eastern part of Austria, mainly the cropland-dominated parts of Austria, which is this orange area here in this map. The green area is mostly grassland-dominated and mountainous. What else you can see in this map are our training areas, which are these three red areas. There are around 100 to 300 square kilometers in area, and we use them to generate training data from Google Earth imagery. And the small map I show here, this is the actual area where farmers are eligible for doing this kind of measure and get subsidies for it. This was calculated in a different project and based on modeling inputs of particular phosphorus into surface water bodies. So how did we do our predictions? We used a statistical model and we used topographical indices as predictors. Because we assume that the locations of these ephemeral gullies are mostly predetermined by landscape topography, and we describe the landscape topography by using topographical indices. Our indices are based on the 10-meter digital elevation model, which is based on airborne laser scanning data, and we used no additional input, so no soil data, rainfall or land use data. We used a generalized additive model. Sorry. There are other types of models in use. A lot of studies use machine learning models, but there are also similarly simple statistical models in use, like generalized linear models. And we used Google Earth satellite imagery to generate our training data. So the first few steps in our modeling procedure was to create training data. This was done by mapping or digitizing features of linear erosion that were visible in Google Earth satellite imagery in our training areas, and then followed by several steps of correcting and filtering these data, and in the end generating training point data from these features. So in the top right corner you can see the raw digitized data that we received from our mapper. This also included areas of uncertainty, for example, where it was clearly visible that a trajectory of a ephemeral gully enters and leaves the field, but in between it was already wiped out by tillage operations. So we initially filtered these features based on whether we thought that they were really helpful for our prediction. We had around 200 to 500 features for each of our training areas initially. And what was also necessary for the modeling procedure was to align these features to the digital elevation model, because the digitizing took place without knowledge of the digital elevation model. But if you try to sample raster values, they just have to be spot on aligned with the digital elevation model. And this led to these green polylines, which we called equivalent channels here. And we had about 50 to 80 of them in each of our training areas. And then we applied a buffering procedure to generate training points out of these lines. So we created the blue training points here. They are training points for ephemeral gully occurrence, and the red points are training points for ephemeral gully absence. These are needed for the modeling. And at the end, some manual corrections were still necessary because features not present in the 10-meter digital elevation model, like small roads, stuff like that, we tried to include that as well in parts. So after preparation of the training points, we could move to the actual modeling. So first we calculated our predictors. These were topographical indices. We calculated them in Saga GIS, and we calculated 13 of them. Then we performed a multi-collinearity analysis, because some of these topographical indices are very similar, and this is not very helpful to use them in a statistical model. So we reduced their number to the 8 indices that were not multicollinear. Then we trained one generalized additive model for each of our training areas to predict the training features in there. Then we performed spatial and non-spatial cross-validation, and then we used the best performing of these 3 models to predict our larger area of interest, the eastern part of Austria. The training of the model took place in an R script, so we supplied the model with a raster stack, so all the topographical indices were put on top of each other, and then we extracted the values at the locations of the training points, and then the model should perform its prediction at each of these training points. After the training, we did cross-validation. The general principle of cross-validation is to use only a part of the training points for training and use the rest of it for testing. There are many methods how to do this. The typical method is a non-spatial method, just doing a random split, for example 50-50 or 80-20 or whatever of the training points without using any spatial information. But we wanted to also do spatial cross-validation, and we used the k-means clustering and the factor methods, and we compared the model performance with and without these cross-validation methods. Because if there was a large difference in performance between spatial and non-spatial cross-validation, it would be likely that the models were overfitted. So this is the output of these cross-validation steps. On the y-axis you can see a measure of model performance, the AUROC, which we typically use. So the closer this value is to 1, the better the model performs. And we can see that for each of the training areas, the median of the model performance is not very different in the spatial setting than in the non-spatial setting, which is good because it means that they are likely transferable. But what we can see is that the interquartile ranges are a lot larger with when using the spatial methods than the non-spatial methods. What we also looked into was the variable importance. This is always a big question when you have a model with multiple parameters. You want to know which of the parameters or the predictors is more important and which are less important, which maybe can be omitted. Maybe you can do the whole thing with fewer predictors. So we did permutation-based variable importance with 200 permutations. That means that in turn each of our 8 predictors was replaced with random garbage values, and the resulting reduction in model performance shows the importance of this predictor. And we found that the topographical wetness index, which is one of the most used topographical indices in hydrology, I think, shows the highest performance in our models. Then we have a group of medium to low importance. These are the multi-resolution valley bottom flatness index, the convergence index, and the slope area power index, and the rest of them showed very low importance. What else had to be done? The output of this GAM model is basically a raster of susceptibility to ephemeral gully erosion. That is a value somewhere between 0 and 1. And for any policy-related context, we needed to convert this into binary values. So we needed a threshold to separate between ephemeral gully erosion likely and unlikely. This threshold can be calculated directly out of the data, but only in these locations where you have data. So our threshold is only value in the training areas. And then we selected the best performing of our 3 models to do the prediction for the whole area of interest. We then also implemented a buffering procedure because we needed the output in the form of polygons to intersect them with field polygons, and we had to apply several buffering steps to get from our raw model outputs to these more or less smooth conical polygons starting at the defined width of 18 meters and going up to 36 meters. Yeah, so that was basically the procedure. This is what the final layer for eligibility of this measure looks like. You can look it up at this link. This does not only include our results, but also the results of a second group who used a different model, a more physically based model. These were just lumped together. And in the end, we arrived at these numbers for the main agricultural production zones in Austria. A typical measure for these gully-related studies is gully density, which means the length of ephemeral gullies in kilometers per area. And we arrived at roughly 2 to 3 kilometers per square kilometer gully density, which seems to be in line with most of the literature that we checked. Yeah, what else did come out of it? It seems that around 1,000 farmers actually implemented such grassed waterways under this measure. We also implemented grassed waterways in the experimental catchment that we have at our institute. As I said in the beginning, we had this really large event where you can see again this large gully that is formed, and we overlaid our prediction and tried to install the gully exactly, the grassed waterway exactly there. But because of the considerations of the farmers, you know, they need to have a certain percentage of their total area as Greenland and so on. So they have a lot of regulation, and we ended up with this suboptimal layout. So it looks a bit rectangular and jagged, but that's how they wanted it. Yeah, that's what it looked like. I think immediately after implementation. This was rather late in April last year. So actually the soil cover was not very high here. It was even lower than on the surrounding cereal fields. But this is what it looked like 1 or 2 months later. It already looked a lot better. We also had a look at historical maps in the course of this study. So we compared our prediction to this topographical maps from the 19th century. I don't know if you're familiar with these. They should be available for check partially as well. And curiously, very often the predictions coincide with areas where there used to be grassland or forest. And also in our case, in our catchment, we know that right along this trajectory here, there was an open stream until the 1940s or something, which was put into a pipe and underground. Okay, yeah, I'm still working to put all this into a publication. It will come out soon, so you can keep an eye out for it. And to conclude all of this, one problem that I see is that this measure in the agri-environmental program in Austria is of course specific for each field. You only can make these measures for one field with one field owner who gets the subsidy. But in this case, you would actually need to involve all the farmers or all the field owners along such a grassed waterway to really be effective. And I'm very interested to see how this turns out in the next years. I'm also aware that what I showed here and what we did in this study is only a small part of what you are trying to do in the Living Landscapes project or with your model, as I understand it. But still, we have not found a way to put this into some kind of larger framework. Because we also have other projects dealing with vegetated filter strips, hedgerows, with linear retention structures and retention ponds and stuff like that, but these are always separate projects in our case, and we have not been successful in combining these. And we would very much like to change that in the future. So much from me. Thank you very much.
I have some questions. So, first of all, I wanted to, maybe it's not a question, it's just a comment. We also work with these historical maps that were, I think, formed in the whole Austrian-Hungarian Empire, probably, right? So, I don't know if you know that, but we have developed a tool. It's already available online. We can later on send you a link. It's just right now, it's in Czech, but definitely it will be international soon, which is where you can upload the image, the scan of the map, and it will basically crop the stuff that is not interesting, like the outside map regions containing legends and this kind of stuff. And then also it's using artificial neural networks. It's basically enabling extraction of some features, like different types of grass, wet grass, dry grass, lakes, and this kind of stuff, water. So just for you, if you can try it later on, maybe report some errors and bugs or not, yes. Yeah, then we can talk about it later. But I would like to actually ask, how is it with the computational efficiency or not efficiency? I mean, how is it time consuming to do all the work that you did?
Yes, it was. I mean, the prediction itself is not time consuming. So once the model is set up, it will run for you, as you saw, 2/3 of Austria. It will run in half an hour or so, or maybe an hour. But all the cross validation steps, these were the time consuming steps.
So thanks. So that's, I understand that the prediction is faster, but how long did you have to then cross-validate? Can you, and do you have any special cluster for that, or how does it work actually?
Yes, we used spatial clustering methods, as I explained in the presentation. There we used 3 different methods in total. So we used one non-spatial to compare it with 2 spatial methods. And we used, for once, the k-means clustering, which is a very common clustering algorithm, I think. And we also used the so-called factor, where we assigned the ID of one flow path back, which we had from the start, from the digitizing in the beginning. And we kept all the features separate, so to speak, by using this ID. I don't know if this makes sense.
No, it makes sense. Yes. I was by cluster actually. I was asking about computational cluster, like if you have any.
No.
Like,
It was just on a desktop
okay.
PC.
Okay. But so all this training and cross validation, it took like I don't know, days, hours.
Well, it took months, of course, in the end, but
Months.
the pure computational time would be more like hours.
Yeah, okay. That's what I just wanted to know. Thanks. And yeah, that's probably what I wanted to ask. So maybe once more, yes, there is a question, not only from myself.
Yes, hello, thank you. I would probably ask, since you said that at the end you cross-check it with the historical map, and if you did different spots or different places with the same system of calculations and stuff, how often do you actually cross with the historical data? Like if possibly the historical map is already a reliable source for such changes in the landscape? Like, if you understand me, how often does it actually meet?
We cannot tell. I mean, I showed this as a bit of a bonus, this one image. We haven't been able to do it systematically. We don't have this, as the colleague said in the beginning, we don't have this topographical map in vector format. We only have the images more or less and no classification, so we cannot automatically do this comparison with the historical maps. We are still trying to do this, and maybe the tool that was mentioned can help in this. So I cannot really quantify it. We just did it like sporadically by looking over it, not systematically. So we lack the input data to do this.
Okay, is the answer enough? Yes. Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, Jiří Malík.
Já mám teda česky otázku, jestli bys něj mohl přeložit. Poměrně jednoduchá, jestli by nám pomohl s implementací modelu živá krajina do Rakouska, protože máme vlastně ty stejné mapy, takže můžeme rozjet rovnou.
Okay, so there is a question. If you would be willing to cooperate on implementing or application of the model which we call living landscape, which is a set of rules to help the increase the retention of water in the landscape. If you would be actually willing to help to implement it in Austria.
Yes, that would be very interesting, especially in the border region, where the landscape is very similar, like southern Bohemia, northern Low Austria is very similar, and the same in Moravia. Definitely, yes.
Okay, so the contact has been established, and Jiří is applauding, and okay, we stay in touch definitely.